It was a gray morning on the London Overground rolling into Zone 1. Windows filmed with drizzle, and everyone in that soft British hush. I was standing by the doors next to a classic Midwestern dad in a brand new ball cap. Polo tucked into jeans, white sneakers you could see from space. He looked up at the contactless sign, squinted at the route map, tapped his crisp wallet against the pole, and finally came out with, "You guys should really just accept dollars so the system makes sense for everyone." The British guy next to him spent a solid minute explaining Oyster cards, pounds, zones, and how London is not, in fact, a US suburb. At my age, you learn that if empires fall, it's usually from someone like that trying to standardize the trains first. In Rome, just off the Forum, the air smelled like hot stone and espresso, and the ruins sat there like they'd seen every bad decision humanity ever made. A cruise ship mom with a visor and a lanyard full of tickets planted herself in front of a half-collapsed column, hands on hips, loud enough to echo between the arches. The guide was talking about 2,000 years of history when she cut him off with, "Okay, but when are they finally going to fix all this broken stuff for tourists?" He blinked, then patiently explained that the broken stuff predates her country by a couple of millennia, and that's kind of the point. Somewhere in the distance, I'm pretty sure one more marble fragment gave up out of sheer exhaustion. In Munich, in a proper beer hall, where the air is half barley, half old wood, I was at a long table with strangers watching the locals treat a liter of beer like water. Across from me sat a freshly retired Texas businessman, golf tan, Rolex flashing, little leather money clip bulging with green. The waitress put his mask down, he looked at the euro coins like they were arcade tokens and announced, "If you guys priced things in real money like dollars, your economy would work better." She calmly explained euros, VAT, service included, and why she didn't want his 25% tip in crumpled US cash. I just sipped my beer and watched a currency lecture do more damage to his ego than the exchange rate ever could. On a drizzly afternoon in Paris, under one of those beige awnings on the left bank, the clink of cups and low French chatter made a kind of background music. An influencer couple sat next to me, matching beige outfits, tripod folded on the chair, the guy in a hoodie that still had the store creases. The waiter came over with the usual Parisian patience and a handwritten menu that might as well have been a museum artifact. The guy tapped the card like a teacher scolding a student and said, "Can you just write the menu in normal American so people understand what they're buying?" The waiter took a breath deep enough to reach the metro, then explained in perfect English that he was currently standing in France of all places. The coffee was already bitter, but that line aged it another 10 years on the spot. In Reykjavik early summer, the sky was that flat, pale blue that refuses to get dark, and the wind felt like it had opinions. I was on a walking tour with a guy from Ohio, cargo shorts, windbreaker that hadn't been zipped once, squinting at his smartwatch every 10 steps. The guide mentioned the midnight sun and how it barely gets dark this time of year, and the guy stopped dead in the street to announce, "You really should fix your time zone so it gets dark at a normal hour like back home." The guide smiled and went into axial tilt, latitude, seasons, the whole science lesson you'd normally owe a 7th grader. Truth is, watching a grown man argue with the Earth's rotation is the kind of entertainment you can't put in a brochure. Along La Rambla in Barcelona, the evening smelled like grilled seafood and cigarette smoke, and every table seemed to hold 6 plates for 2 people. At one tapas bar, a recently divorced New Jersey sales rep in a loudly patterned shirt leaned back in his chair like he owned the building. The bill came, small plates, a couple of beers, all pretty reasonable in euros, and he tapped the paper with one manicured finger and said, "If you want real business here, you should put everything in big plate portions and add a normal American tip line." The waiter, who'd clearly heard every version of that speech, quietly explained tapas, shared plates, and the fact that the price already included not hating him. The irony is he came to Europe for the culture and then tried to franchise it before dessert. In Sydney, down at Circular Quay, the sun bounced off the water hard enough to cook you, and the opera house looked exactly like every picture, just somehow hotter. I was leaning on the rail next to a dad in a faded college football hoodie, baseball cap, and sunglasses. He kept sliding up to look serious. He watched the ferries for a minute, then pointed at the traffic on the left and came out with, "You guys really need to switch your driving to the right side so Americans don't get confused." The local next to him, holding a takeaway flat white, calmly explained British influence, road standards, and how Sydney wasn't built around his rental car. At my age, I've learned the quickest way to spot an American abroad is to see who's trying to reformat a continent while jet-lagged. In Athens, late afternoon, the Acropolis steps were radiating heat like an old stove, and the air smelled faintly of dust and sunscreen. A Midwestern church group grandma, in a floral blouse, visor, and orthopedic sandals, paused halfway up, glaring at the Parthenon like it had offended her personally. The guide started explaining how some of the sculptures ended up in London, and she shook her head and declared, "They should just build a fresh one in good condition and keep this old one in storage." He slowly explained restoration, heritage laws, and why you don't just throw out a few thousand years of history like last season's decorations. Somewhere behind us, a teenager stopped complaining about the stairs because apparently there are higher hills to die on. On a chilly canal cruise in Amsterdam, you could smell wet wood, diesel, and just a hint of weed drifting from somewhere you weren't supposed to ask about. A software engineer from California sat across from me. Patagonia vest, neat beard, and a smart watch that probably knew his blood oxygen better than he knew geography. The captain mentioned how the Netherlands manages water levels and polder systems, and the guy lifted his phone, looked at the map, and said, "They should really just copy California's water system so things are more efficient here." The captain, in flawless English, explained centuries of Dutch engineering while steering under a bridge that was older than the guy's entire family line in the States. It's impressive watching someone try to teach the ocean how to be more like their swimming pool. Out near Alice Springs, the outback just sat there in that way. Only empty space can heat, shimmering, and flies acting like they paid rent on your face. A CrossFit-obsessed guy from Florida, tank top and wraparound sunglasses, had insisted on wearing bright white trainers into the red dust. The guide talked about distances, how you could drive for hours without a town, and the guy flexed his shoulders and said, "You really need more rest stops every few miles like the interstate, or no one will want a road trip here." The guide calmly explained that a quick drive here is longer than most people's home states, and you don't just sprinkle Starbucks across the desert. By the time he'd finished, the only thing more lost than that guy's sense of distance was the color of his shoes. In Dublin, a soft rain was doing that Irish thing where it's somehow both nothing and absolutely everywhere. And the pub was warm and low-lit, smelling like wood and spilled stout. I was at the bar next to a retired New York cop in a leather jacket that had seen some things, waving a folded $20 bill at the bartender. The menu clearly listed prices in euros, but he tapped the bill on the counter and announced, "Just keep pouring until this is gone, it's worth more anyway." The bartender, who definitely worked worse nights, explained exchange rates, legal tender, and the small fact that US cash doesn't magically outrank local currency. At my age, I've learned you can measure a man's worldview by how offended he gets when his wallet stops being universal. In Vienna, in one of those quiet trams that feels more like a moving library, everyone was sitting politely with their coats folded just so. A suburban Arizona school principal, on her first trip abroad, clutched a guidebook and a reusable water bottle plastered with inspirational slogans. The automated voice reminded everyone about keeping noise down. And she leaned over to her friend and said, "They should let people take phone calls so the ride feels more normal, like back home." The old man across from her gently pointed out that the quiet was the entire point and not some glitch they forgot to fix. Honestly, it's impressive how fast someone can decide silence is a problem just because they didn't design it. Down at Bondi Beach in Sydney, the sand was hot enough to make you reconsider every life choice. And the lifeguard flags snapped in the wind like they meant it. A dad-bod entrepreneur from Chicago in a too-tight tank top and those mirrored sunglasses that make everyone look guilty stood with his kids at the shoreline. The lifeguard explained rips, UV levels, and why the sun here feels like it has teeth, and the guy nodded once and said, "You should tone down the UV index so tourists don't complain about your brand." The lifeguard stared at him for a long second before explaining that the sun was not, in fact, part of a marketing strategy. Somewhere between the waves and the ozone layer, you could almost hear Australia refusing the rebrand. In Prague, just off Old Town Square, the cobblestones were slick from a recent shower, and the astronomical clock was gathering its usual crowd of people pretending to understand it. A mid-level management consultant from Colorado, dress shirt with the sleeves rolled just right, and a messenger bag that screamed "Slides Deck," was studying the cathedral nearby. The guide started describing centuries of construction and religious shifts. And the consultant tilted his head and said, "They should really modernize the whole thing into a multi-purpose event space to monetize the foot traffic." The guide, who clearly loved that church more than the guy loved his LinkedIn profile, quietly explained heritage, preservation, and how not everything needs a revenue model. Some monuments survive sieges, fires, and plagues, and then one guy with a PowerPoint tries to finish the job.